My name is Laura and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar, and today we're going to be taking a look at 5 haunted locations, specifically castles and palaces whispered to have unearthly connections. Noble homes have witnessed some of the most interesting and dramatic moments in history, with their connections to royalty and politics putting them at the forefront of major historical events. Sometimes the dramatic lives of the individuals who reside in such places can have dramatic ends, and it is in these instances that ghosts are claimed to be created, with the castles and palaces thus becoming home to more than their fair share of the undead. At the beginning of the 20th century, a beautiful Baroque palace in Madrid, which had only recently been completed, became desolate. For the latter half of the 19th century, it was the home of the renowned first Marquess of Linares, José de Murga y Riolid, who moved into the incomplete palace with his family in 1884. Even though the Marquess was very well regarded in Spain, using his great fortune to fund many charitable works, including building a grand hospital for the public which is still in use today, a dark legend has since tarnished his name and is said to haunt the halls of his great palace to this day. As a young man, José fell in love with a lady called Raimunda. Unlike him, she was of humble origins. Determinedly against their union, José's father sent his son to London to forget about her. However, years later, after his father died, José returned to Madrid, and his love for Raimunda, still very much alive, married her. Until this point, this tale seems akin to many classic stories of aristocratic love for someone of humble birth. And yet, it was not the humility of Raimunda's birth that filled José's father with abhorrence, but rather a secret which he did not wish to divulge, that of an illicit love affair that had birthed an illegitimate daughter, Raimunda. And so, according to historical rumour, José and Raimunda were half-siblings. José is said to have discovered this secret whilst rummaging through his father's letters sometime after his marriage to Raimunda. The newlyweds were devastated, and it is rumoured that they secretly petitioned the Pope to give them a dispensation for their ancestral union. After much lobbying, Pope Pius IX is thought to have granted the dispensation of casti convivere, a papal bull which permitted them to live together in chastity. However, far from being chaste, it is whispered that José and Raimunda had a child together, a daughter whose illicit birth induced the Marquesses to commit the most terrible of crimes, infanticide. Her tiny body is thought to have been interred on the grounds of the Palacio de Linares, and it is there that the infant remained as a restless spirit, haunting the walls of her eternal home alongside her guilt-ridden parents. It is, of course, difficult to confirm such heinous rumours, and yet there exists some circumstantial evidence for this legend. Whilst Raimunda's mother is known, the identity of her father is not recorded, and she and José had no legitimate offspring. Not merely that, a reputable Spanish historian has come forward stating that there may indeed be some truth in the legend, which the family has attempted to occult right up to the present day. Even when it comes to the existence of ghosts within the palace, there are experts who believe that this is the case. In 1990, a doctor of medicine and psychiatry, Carmen Sanchez de Castro, conducted an investigation of the palace along with a team of 15 people. The investigation was prompted after workers employed to renovate the building claimed to have heard mysterious footsteps and voices saying things such as, "I had a daughter," and "Mama, Mama." During the investigation, the team claimed to have recorded some 70 disembodied voices, which seemed to confirm the rumours associated with the palace. Many of the voices captured are tragic, including a wailing cry for Raimunda. A cassette of the recordings was promptly put together and can be heard to this day. The voices which are claimed to have been captured in the palace are indeed ghostly, and are at times almost unbelievably clear. So sensational were these recordings that, after the doctor's investigation in 1990, 200 people stormed the building, wishing to experience the voices for themselves. The palace suffered damage, and the police had to be called in to manage the mob. Since then, there has been no serious investigations of the palace, and skeptics have refuted the cassette of evidence. However, in spite of all of this, reports of paranormal phenomena persist to this day, with visitors to the palace, now a cultural site, convinced that it is haunted. Dragsholm Castle stands on a small island in Denmark-Zealand archipelago. Once an imposing medieval castle, now a luxury Baroque hotel restaurant, the structure is one of the oldest secular buildings in the country, and most famously served as a prison for noble traitors in the 16th and 17th centuries. Arguably the most famous of the castle's prisoners was the 4th Earl of Bothwell, a prominent Scottish nobleman born in 1534, who became sensationally involved with Mary Queen of Scots after her husband Lord Darnley was murdered in 1567. After a botched explosion caused by 2 barrels of gunpowder placed under Darnley's sleeping quarters, the king consort fled from his lodgings in his nightclothes, injured by the blast and pursued by an assassin, who ultimately caught and smothered him. Not long after Darnley's death, Queen Mary was seemingly abducted by Bothwell and forced to marry him, and so the Earl was implicated in Lord Darnley's untimely passing, with his marriage to the young and recently widowed Queen of Scotland seen as a grab for power. Their union was, as such, extremely controversial and divided the country in two. Only a few short months later, the Scottish lords who opposed the marriage met Mary and Bothwell in the field at the Battle of Carrickbrig Hill. Soon defeated, Mary surrendered and abdicated her throne, while her new husband fled. Bothwell eventually ended up in Scandinavia, where, on the orders of King Frederick II of Denmark, he was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Darnley and imprisoned at Dragsholm Castle. With it clear that Mary would never regain her throne, Bothwell, the once king consort of Scotland, became insignificant and was left quite literally to rot, chained to a pillar in the castle with a circular groove on the floor below him to drain off excreta. For 10 years, he was chained in these appalling conditions until, utterly insane, he died at the age of 44. Given the terrible circumstances that led to his demise, it is perhaps unsurprising that Bothwell's spirit is said to linger at Dragsholm, with many people claiming to have seen his ghostly figure riding through the castle's courtyard, stuck, so it seems, in pursuit of retrieving the Scottish crown. In addition to Bothwell, the castle is whispered to be haunted by a white lady, the tragic spirit of a young woman whose body was, according to legend, bricked up inside the walls. The daughter of one of the castle's former masters, it is said that she was disposed of when her father discovered her love for a commoner. Ever since, she is claimed to stalk the castle's staircase, having been witnessed by numerous guests and visiting psychics. Hauntingly, in the 1930s, when workers were repairing the walls of the castle, a skeleton, shrouded in a tattered white dress, was discovered behind the stone, lending credence to the legend of the White Lady and the ghosts of Dragsholm Castle. Hampton Court Palace has a tremendous reputation for being haunted. In fact, this 16th century marvel of architecture is considered to be one of the most haunted buildings in the United Kingdom. Probably the most well-known of the palace's ghost stories is the one concerning Henry VIII's fifth wife, his rose without a thorn, Catherine Howard. Found guilty of adultery, Catherine was arrested and stripped of her titles in November 1541. It is said that when the young queen was seized by guards at Hampton Court, she broke free and ran to the doors of the Chapel Royal, where she believed Henry was at prayer. Hoping a personal appeal to her husband would change her fate, she screamed to the king for mercy. Ultimately, however, she was executed at the Tower of London on the 13th of February 1542. Throughout the next 480 years, visitors to the palace have reported seeing the ghost of Catherine Howard in that part of the building, eternally seeking out her husband so as to plead for her life. These anecdotal stories were so well known that by 1918, when Hampton Court Palace opened to the public, the space associated with Catherine's story was already dubbed the Haunted Gallery. Since then, with the arrival of over 500,000 visitors each year, reports of paranormal occurrences in that part of the palace have only increased. In addition to witnessing apparitions, visitors have reported feeling chills and strange sensations when they pass along the corridor. And bizarrely, in 1999, during separate tours of the palace, 2 female guests fainted on the very same spot in the Haunted Gallery within half an hour of each other. With the new millennium came a surge in the number of reports of Catherine Howard being encountered in the Haunted Gallery. Determined to understand more about these alleged paranormal occurrences, the palace invited Richard Wiseman, a professor of psychology known for his critical examination of anomalous phenomena, to conduct an investigation. And so, a century's worth of testimonies were used to plot out a map of the phenomena reported in the Haunted Gallery. Not only that, for the week that they were there, Wiseman and his team collected questionnaire data from visitors. They concluded that suggestion played a large part in people's experiences at the palace. Those who admitted a belief in ghosts were far more likely to experience something strange. And yet, contrary to Wiseman's skeptical expectations, non-believers also reported strange sensations, including unusual emotional feelings and a sense of presence within the Haunted Gallery. After further investigation, a relationship between supposed supernatural locations and local magnetic fields was identified. And so, is Hampton Court Palace's haunted reputation due to the effects of magnetic interference? Or, as investigators of the past have speculated, does paranormal activity influence magnetic energy, with these findings thus providing some evidence to support the existence of ghosts at Hampton Court Palace? Certainly, there are plenty of personal encounters reported at the site to support this, even from members of staff. One example comes from Ronald, a senior warder at the palace, who claims that he and several other members of staff have experienced many things which they cannot explain, including hearing a door open, followed by disembodied footsteps in the Queen's Gallery after closing. Another tale involves 2 female visitors who had to be calmed down and actually removed from the palace by members of staff after they were found screaming and shaking with fear, claiming to have seen an apparition. Chillingly, both women described the figure in the same way, headless and dressed in a dark robe. Other plentiful accounts include members of the public being pushed by ghostly hands, tricky locks and electrical malfunctions, and even the repeated manifestation of a white, cloudy figure on the Queen's staircase. These are but a handful of the ghost stories of Hampton Court Palace. Such is the extent of its haunted reputation. Ultimately, the only way for one to truly judge the validity of such paranormal claims is to visit for oneself. Raised in blood, blood be thy portion. was the curse purportedly set upon the foundations of Leap Castle when it was built around 1250 AD. Different legends describe how this blood came to be spilt. In one story, it was a peasant who, in an attempt to avoid paying taxes to his lord, met a grisly end. In another story, it was a member of the O'Bannon clan who died in a challenge over ownership of the land. In addition to this ominous origin, there is much evidence to suggest that before the castle was built, the site was used in druidic ceremonies for hundreds of years. Some believe that the land's prominent position on the intersection of two ley lines make it a particularly sensitive location, and that because of this, events, whether good or bad, leave a more powerful impression in the earth and on the castle itself. If this is the case, then the ruthless and powerful clan of the O'Carrolls, who possessed the castle for many years, saturated the location with unimaginable suffering. In the 1900s, during restoration of the site, a gruesome discovery was made. Workers uncovered an oubliette, a particularly abominable variety of dungeon which was only accessible via a trapdoor behind the chapel wall. 8 feet below the trapdoor, there were large, terrible spikes. It is thought that the O'Carrolls would guide their unsuspecting guests over this trapdoor and then open it, for them to plunge and be impaled on the spikes. Death would have only been quick for the fortunate. When this was found during the restoration, 3 cartloads of bones were removed from the oubliette, with a pocket watch dating from the 1800s being found amongst them, meaning that the trapdoor was in use for hundreds of years. Stories of ghosts roaming the castle halls have also been around for centuries. One such paranormal entity is claimed to be more dreadful than the rest, and in the past it was simply called It or Thing. Today it is considered to be a dark elemental. Mildred Darby, who lived at Leap Castle in the early 20th century, wrote one of the most detailed accounts of an encounter with this entity in a letter dating from 1909. "I cannot describe in words how utterly awful the thing was," she began, its very undefinableness rendering the horrible shadow more gruesome. Describing it, she wrote that it was human in shape, a little shorter than I am, and that she could just make out the shape of big black holes like great eyes and sharp features. These large holes of blackness were recurrent descriptors of Darby's, as was the uniform tint of grey which coloured its skin. Others also witnessed this entity at the time and gave similar descriptions. It was also said that the thing possessed a horrible stench of decay and death. Terribly witnessed testimonies of this elemental being stretch until the modern day. In 2002, a member of a television crew filming at the castle wrote an account describing their alleged encounter. They detailed how they saw a white mist suddenly rush them, and then felt a pain as if something had just pierced under their right rib cage. The pain, so they wrote, went all the way through to the back, causing them to afterwards feel as though a hole had been punched through their chest on a spiritual level. Dramatically, they even went so far as to state that they were left feeling as though they had experienced a large amount of blood loss and were on the verge of death, and that the castle itself was absorbing their life force. Encounters such as these have led many to believe that whatever haunts Leap Castle is not merely the soul of one of the O'Carrolls' victims, or indeed malevolent ancestors, but rather that the entity is inhuman, an elemental force of otherworld origin, or perhaps even a dark embodiment of all of the pain and suffering connected to the site. Disturbingly, those who have researched the subject claim that such a being can be far more dangerous than any human spirit. Elementals can influence the material world and, as several testimonies suggest, cause actual injury to a living person. According to occult belief, a spirit of the dead may be able to frighten you, but are limited to emotional trauma, whereas no one knows how much physical damage a dark elemental can do. Thus, calling Leap Castle haunted seems inadequate in regards to the extent of the dangerous paranormal activity that is claimed to occur within. Located on the magnificently rugged coastline of southern Wales, close to the village of Southerndown, the sparse remains of Dunraven Castle occupy a prominent position. A steep headland overlooking the bay, a site of such strategic importance that it was first fortified in the Iron Age. Today, very little is left of the castle manor, for centuries home to a succession of families, a fortress in times of war, an imposing hunting lodge, invaluable as a military hospital. In 1963, Dunraven Castle was stripped of its wealth and torn down. A careless demolition. And yet, despite its erasal, nothing could be done to oust its history from the land, for, according to local legend, its past has left its mark in the form of the ghosts and spirits whispered to wander the remains. One spirit claimed to be in residence at Dunraven is Walter Vaughan, a man remembered as the wicked Lord of Dunraven, an ingenious fellow who is said to have been responsible for the death of many. The story goes that Vaughan began with good intentions. Living at the castle in the latter part of the 16th century, he knew how dangerous the rocky bay which his home overlooked could be. One day, upon spying a shipwreck, he took a rope and, not caring for his own safety, swam out to the distressed vessel and saved the lives of the entire crew. After this heroic act, he produced a report outlining the ways in which such shipwrecks may be avoided in future. Central government, however, completely ignored his ideas, and thus sparked in Vaughan a desire for vengeance. Hungry for independence from London, he spent a considerable amount of his family's wealth attempting to resurrect the old Welsh chieftains. In this venture, however, he failed, and impoverished the castle in the process. It was at this point that all of Vaughan's good intentions disappeared. Desperate for money, he formed an alliance with a man called Mat of the Iron Hand, a former pirate whom Vaughan some time before had arrested. In the struggle, Mat had lost his hand, and later had it replaced with an iron hook, thus birthing his appellation. A man who knew many things about dishonest practice, Vaughan regarded Mat of the Iron Hand as the ideal fellow with whom to take advantage of Dunraven's dangerous bay. And so they became wreckers, luring ships close to the shore with lamps tied onto cattle so as to see them crash on the waves. If there were no survivors of the wrecks, whatever loot the ships carried would be Vaughan and Mat's to share. And according to legend, the men made sure there were none to survive. And so, for a time, Vaughan's fortunes improved, until one day 2 of his 4 sons came into difficulty whilst out on the sea. About 1.5 miles away from Dunraven, their boat drifted away whilst they were on a rocky outcrop. With no other boat to go out and rescue them, Walter Vaughan was forced to watch as the sea rose, swept over them, and drowned his 2 children. Around the same time, another of his sons also died, and thus Vaughan was left with only one, a young man who had gone to seek his fortune on a merchant ship. Vaughan waited for his boy to return, anxious for the safety of his only heir. One night his heir returned. A fine merchant ship approached the bay, and Mat of the Iron Hand, desirous of its loot, tempted it onto the rocks and wrecked it. Washed up on the rocky shore, there was a sole survivor, a young man who wore the ring bearing the emblem of the Vaughan family on his hand. Spying Walter Vaughan's only son, and not having forgotten the loss of his hand all those years before on the orders of his master, Mat took his revenge. He cut off Vaughan's son's hand, and with the point of his sword, ended him there on the beach. After that, he took the hand to Vaughan and showed it to him, proof that all of his sons were now gone. Today it is said that Walter Vaughan lingers on the cliffside, a wailing spectral figure forever mourning the loss of his children. It is whispered that he can be seen at night on the anniversary of that tragic day, and that he keeps company with the spirits of those sailors who perished at his command. Aside from Walter Vaughan, other ghostly figures connected to Dunraven include that of the Blue Lady, a spectral female who is said to wander the gardens and indeed the castle itself before its demolition. According to the testimony from a lady called Jenny, the Blue Lady was regularly seen by nurses who worked at the castle during the Great War, when it was used as a convalescent hospital. Jenny's great-grandmother, she claims, witnessed the spirit on several occasions, stating that she used to appear at the end of the bed of a soldier who was dying. And nurses were not the only ones connected to the castle to engage in the paranormal phenomena. Intriguingly, the 4th Earl of Dunraven was actively involved in spiritualism and attended many supposedly incredible seances over a 2-year period, which culminated in him publishing a book titled Experiences in Spiritualism. He also, in 1926, published a collection of reports of paranormal happenings said to have taken place at the castle, taking time to interview his staff and gather first-hand testimonies, with special attention being paid to the by then infamous apparition of the Blue Lady. It seems that, in his mind at least, the spectral lady was a very real thing. Today, both she and the wicked Lord of Dunraven, Walter Vaughan, are still said to be encountered at the castle. A ruin whose walls have been all but swept away, Dunraven echoes with its past, its stories largely forgotten, but its once inhabitants perhaps less so. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video, and a quick message before we part. It will soon have been 2 years since the release of my documentary on life after death, In Search of the Dead. To celebrate its anniversary, I will be making it free to watch here on YouTube for 2 weeks only, starting Saturday the 20th of November. So that you don't miss this time-limited release, keep an eye out for its premiere video watch page, which will be going live over the coming weeks, where you can set a reminder. Or equally, ensure that you are subscribed with the bell icon clicked to receive notifications for all my new videos. And for those of you who've seen In Search of the Dead already, there will be an extra special something at the end for those 2 celebratory weeks, which you might like to tune in for. With that, all that is left for me to do is to wish you a happy Halloween. Stay safe and stay spooky. Until next time.